Good evening, night owls, and welcome to Whisper Crowley. My name is Gino, and tonight, maybe even in the nights to come, I'll be your storyteller. So, without further ado, let's dive into our first tale. It started with a ring. The sound of an old phone, the kind that hadn't worked in years, ringing in the middle of the night. I hadn't heard it in ages. The phone had been dead for months, buried in a drawer somewhere with the rest of my forgotten things. The kind of things you don't throw away because, for some reason, you keep them close. The old phone was a relic of my past, a symbol of things I tried to forget. But now it was ringing. I froze. My heart pounded in my chest. It was coming from the drawer where the phone had sat, long disconnected from the world. I hadn't plugged it in for a while, and I didn't even have a landline anymore. The thought alone was enough to send a chill down my spine. The ringing continued, louder now, and I knew I had to check. But a part of me, some part I couldn't explain, didn't want to. The phone had always been there, a symbol of a different time, and the idea of it suddenly coming to life in the middle of the night felt unnatural. I walked over to the drawer, the floor creaking beneath my feet, as though the house itself was watching me. I opened it slowly, feeling my breath catch in my throat. There it was sitting among the scattered papers, the forgotten cables, and dust, the phone still ringing. I picked it up hesitantly, unsure of what to expect. "Hello?" I said, my voice shaking. I had no idea why I answered. I didn't think anyone would be on the other end. At first, there was nothing but silence. Then, a faint sound, a whisper. It was barely audible, but it was there. "Help me," it said. My pulse quickened. The voice was familiar, but it didn't make sense. I hadn't heard that voice in years. And then, another sound, a sharp crack. The sound of glass shattering. I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at it, wondering if I had imagined it. But the ringing stopped. There was only the eerie quiet. I looked at the phone screen. There were no messages, no missed calls, nothing. I felt a chill run down my spine, and for a moment I thought I was going crazy. Could it have been a prank? Some sick joke? But the sound, that whisper, and the unmistakable crack of glass, it was too real. I placed the phone back into the drawer, trying to shake off the feeling that I was being watched. My mind raced. I had to be imagining it. Maybe it was just my mind playing tricks. After all, I had been through a lot recently. The trauma of my past, everything that I'd been running from had a way of surfacing when I least expected it. But this felt different. It wasn't just in my head. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I could still hear that whisper, faintly echoing in my mind. The voice from the past. Help me. What did it mean? I thought of all the people I had known, friends, family, acquaintances. Who could it have been? It didn't matter. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was coming for me. Something I had left behind. Something I wasn't ready to face again. The next morning, I tried to push everything to the back of my mind. It had to have been a trick, some kind of malfunction. The phone was old, after all. I hadn't used it in years. Maybe it was just a glitch. Or maybe I dreamt it. But as I sat at the kitchen table, trying to distract myself with a cup of coffee, I heard it again. The phone rang. The same damn phone. It wasn't in the drawer this time, though. It was on the kitchen counter, directly in front of me. I must have set it down there at some point last night. I hadn't noticed, but now it was there, its cold, lifeless presence staring back at me as the ringtone filled the room. I stared at it for a moment, my heart racing. The same sick feeling that had gripped me the night before returned, spreading through my chest. I didn't want to answer it. I couldn't but I knew I had to. I picked it up, the plastic feeling foreign in my hand. "Hello?" My voice cracked, and I hated how weak I sounded. This time there was no whisper. No voice. Just static, a crackling hiss that filled the air like a faint buzzing. But then, slowly, unmistakably, I heard it more clearly this time. The sound of glass breaking. It was louder now, sharper, like someone was smashing a window piece by piece. I jerked the phone away from my ear, my breath coming in shallow bursts. The static continued for a few seconds before cutting off. Then, just like the night before, the phone went silent. My hands were trembling. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. This wasn't a coincidence. This wasn't a malfunction. I knew that now. I stood there for a moment frozen, trying to make sense of what was happening. The phone wasn't just malfunctioning. It was trying to tell me something. But what? I placed it back down on the counter, my mind reeling. The glass breaking. That sound. I couldn't shake it, and as I stared at the phone, I had this sinking feeling in my stomach as if something was about to happen. Something I couldn't control. I needed to get rid of it. I couldn't keep this phone around. But I had no idea where to take it. It felt wrong to just throw it away. Something told me I couldn't get rid of it that easily. As I reached for my jacket to head up, a sudden thought struck me. There was one person who might know something about this phone. My brother, Adam. I hadn't spoken to him in years. He had moved away, far enough that I could almost forget about him. But back when we were kids, we'd spent countless hours together laughing, talking, playing. We shared everything. Except for that one thing. I pushed the thought aside. I didn't want to think about that part of our past. Not now. Not when things were already starting to spiral. But something told me I needed to reach out. Something told me that Adam might know more about the strange phone than I did. I grabbed my phone, dialing his number, and waited. It rang once. Twice. 3 times. Then finally he picked up. Hello? His voice sounded distant, muffled, as if he was underwater. Adam, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I need to talk to you. It's about the phone, the one we used to have when we were kids. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Which phone? Adam finally asked, his voice low. The one I have now, I replied. The one that just rang. A sudden silence filled the line, and then I heard the faint sound of glass breaking again. The exact same sound. Clearer this time. Closer. I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at it in confusion. I wasn't sure what was happening, but it was as if the sound was coming from somewhere else. Like something was trying to get through. Adam's voice came back, this time trembling. Where did you find it? I don't know, I said, my throat going dry. I didn't even know it still worked. It has been in a drawer for years. There was another long pause, and I could hear Adam breathing heavily. You need to get rid of it, he said urgently. Now, do you hear me? You need to throw it away. Don't keep it. Don't answer it again. Why? What is going on? I asked, my voice rising. Just trust me. Do it now, he insisted. There is something wrong with that phone, something we didn't understand back then. I didn't know what to think anymore. My mind was a blur of questions, of confusion. What was happening? Why had he reacted that way? I wasn't sure if I believed him, but I knew one thing for sure. I had to find out what was really going on. The phone wasn't just an old relic from my past. It was something more. And if Adam knew something I didn't, I needed to find out before it was too late. I hung up the phone before Adam could say anything else. My mind was racing, heart pounding in my chest. Everything felt wrong. I stood there, staring at the silent device in my hand, my thumb instinctively grazing the warm plastic. I could still hear that sound of the glass breaking. It hadn't left my mind. It felt as if it had lodged itself into my brain, echoing with every passing second. I didn't understand. Adam's voice had sounded like he was afraid, desperate even. But why? And what was this phone? Why was it calling me? What was it trying to say? My eyes kept drifting to the phone. The one on the kitchen counter. It sat there like a forgotten relic, waiting for me to answer it again. But Adam's words kept ringing in my ears. Get rid of it. on T answer it again. I needed to figure this out. I couldn't just walk away. The curiosity was eating me alive. I grabbed my jacket and headed for the door, trying to push the panic down. The cold air hit me when I stepped outside, but it wasn't enough to clear my thoughts. I had to get to the bottom of this. The more I thought about it, the more I realized Adam's warning was more than just fear. There was something he wasn't telling me. Something important. The drive to his apartment felt longer than usual. The world around me blurred as I drove through the streets, my mind spinning with possibilities, scenarios. Why hadn't I seen it sooner? Why hadn't I noticed how much the phone was a part of things? The more I thought about it, the more I questioned if the phone had ever really been a forgotten object at all. What if it was always meant to be this way? As I pulled into his parking lot, a wave of unease washed over me. Adam's apartment complex was old, tucked away between a few run-down buildings, its peeling paint and cracked windows somehow comforting in their familiarity. I didn't want to ask Adam more questions than necessary, but I knew I had no choice. Something was pulling me to him. Something I didn't understand. And if he knew anything about the phone, I needed to find out now. I rang the doorbell, my breath heavy in the quiet night air. After a moment, the door creaked open, and there he was standing in the doorway, looking at me with a strange expression on his face. He hadn't changed much since we last spoke, but there was something in his eyes that wasn't there before. Fear. Not the kind of fear you see in a nightmare, but the kind of fear you feel when you know something terrible is coming, and you can stop it. You came, he said, his voice low. I told you not to. I had to know, I replied, forcing the words out. What is going on, Adam? What is it about that phone? Why did you react like that? He stepped aside, motioning for me to come in. I hesitated for a moment, but then walked through the door. The apartment was dimly lit, cluttered with things that looked like they hadn't been touched in years. Dust settled in the corners of the room, and I could hear the soft hum of an old fan in the background. Adam closed the door behind me, then turned and faced me, his back against the door as if he were trying to block me from leaving. You shouldn't have answered it, he said again, more quietly this time. It was a mistake. I didn't say anything at first. I was still trying to process everything. I couldn't just brush off the strange way he was acting. There was more to this than he was telling me, I could feel it. And for the first time, I realized I was scared. Not just of the phone, but of him. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. What happened with that phone, Adam? What is it doing? His eyes shifted away from mine, avoiding the question. It took a long time before he finally spoke, his voice shaky. When we were kids, I told you to forget about it. That phone, it was never just a phone. It had a connection, something we didn't understand. I waited, watching him closely, but he didn't continue. I stepped forward. What kind of connection? What do you mean? Adam ran a hand through his hair, his eyes darting to the corners of the room as if the shadows themselves were watching him. It was never meant to be found. It was meant to be gone. When you started getting those calls, I knew you'd have to deal with it eventually. It is dangerous. Dangerous? I repeated, my mind racing. How, why? Because it doesn't just call anyone, he said, his voice growing softer. It calls the ones who be connected with it, the ones who were meant to, and when it calls, it doesn't stop. It pulls you in, and the things you hear, they not just sounds, they echoes. Echoes of what? Echoes of things you've left behind, things you've forgotten, he said, his voice growing distant. Things you thought you could escape. It doesn't matter where you go, it always finds you, it always knows. I could feel my breath catch in my chest. I didn't know what he meant, but the fear in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. Something about that phone, something about the calls, was connected to things I hadn't even begun to understand. And now I was already too far gone. Adam, I whispered, my voice barely audible. What is it calling me for? He shook his head, his gaze falling to the floor. You were not ready to know that yet. Before I could ask more, the phone in my pocket rang. I froze. It wasn't the old phone. It was my phone. The ringtone echoed in the room, harsh and jarring against the silence. I glanced down at my phone, the screen illuminating my shaking hands. It was an unknown number. For a moment I stood frozen, not knowing whether to answer or ignore it. My breath felt shallow, and the air around me seemed to thicken, pressing in from all sides. I looked at Adam, who stood motionless across from me, his face drained of color. "Don't he whispered urgently. "Don't he answer it." But I couldn't help myself. I pressed the green button. My fingers were cold, but somehow I still managed to hold the phone up to my ear. The line was silent for a moment, stretching into a painful quiet that only heightened the tension in my chest. And then, just as I thought I might hang up, a soft voice broke the silence. "Hello?" It was my own voice. I dropped the phone. "Did you hear that?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Did you hear it?" Adam took a step back, his eyes wide. He hadn't heard it. Or maybe he was too scared to admit it. But I had heard it. It was unmistakable. It was me, my voice, but it wasn't me. The way it echoed in the phone speaker was wrong, distorted, as though it was coming from somewhere else, somewhere deep inside my mind. "I didn't say that," I whispered. "I didn't speak." But the voice on the phone was still ringing in my ears, soft and hollow. "You should have stayed away," it said again, the words seeping into my skin, carrying an icy chill with them. I snapped my eyes to Adam, my heart racing. He wasn't looking at me anymore. He was staring at the door to his bedroom, the one that was always closed when I visited. It was cracked open, just a sliver, like someone was watching from inside. "Adam, what is in there?" I asked, barely able to get the words out. My body was stiff with fear. He didn't answer. Instead, he turned away quickly, walking toward the door like something was pulling him, urging him closer to the darkness within. His face was blank, his footsteps slow and heavy. "Adam," I called again, my voice rising in panic. But he didn't respond. He was already gone. I ran after him, ignoring the dread pulling in my stomach. As I approached the door, I saw it, my phone, lying on the floor in the middle of the room, the screen cracked and flickering like it had been through something terrible. It was the same phone that had called me earlier. The one that wasn't supposed to exist. Adam was kneeling next to it, his hands trembling as he picked it up. His eyes were wide with terror, but he said nothing, just kept staring at the phone screen. "Adam, what are you doing?" I asked, my voice almost breaking. His response was slow, like it took everything in him to form the words. "It knows," he said softly. "It always knows when you're close." I reached forward to take the phone from him, but as my fingers brushed against it, a wave of coldness shot through my body, freezing me in place. My breath hitched, and I could hear a faint sound of the unmistakable crackle of static on the line. And then, once again, that voice. My voice. "You shouldn't have come," it said. The words vibrated through me, sending a shiver down my spine. It was clear now. The voice was no longer coming from the phone. It was coming from inside the room. The walls seemed to hum with the dark energy, the shadows growing thicker with every passing second. The air felt heavier, suffocating, as if something was closing in around us. Adam, too, seemed to sense it. He looked up, his eyes wide with terror, his mouth moving, but no words came out. It was as though he was trying to scream, but his voice was stolen from him. The phone began to flicker wildly, as if caught in some kind of electric storm. And then, through the static, I heard it. The sound of breaking glass. It came from everywhere. It was in the walls, in the air, in my head. It wasn't just a sound. It was a sensation. I could feel the shards of glass tearing through the air, scraping against my skin, pulling at my flesh. I looked down at my hands, and they were covered in blood. But when I looked back up, the blood was gone. Everything was gone. The phone, the room, Adam, everything had disappeared. I was standing alone in a pitch-black void, with nothing but the echo of my own heartbeat for company. The only thing left was the voice. "Welcome back," it whispered, and the words sent a wave of nausea through me. "I've been waiting." I gasped for air, my lungs struggling to breathe in the crushing darkness that surrounded me. I reached out, my fingers brushing against something cold, rough. A wall. I wasn't alone here. The voice had stopped, but I could still feel its presence lingering in the air, swirling around me like smoke. Every breath I took seemed to get harder. I wanted to scream, but my throat was dry, tight, as though the very air itself was choking me. "Where am I?" I whispered, my voice sounding too weak to be my own. The words seemed to vanish into the void, absorbed by the endless blackness. There was no response, just a hollow ringing silence, broken only by the thudding of my heart in my chest. I tried to move, my legs shaky and unsteady beneath me. It felt like the ground beneath my feet was shifting, as though the world itself was slipping out of place. Each step I took felt like I was wading through water, thick and oppressive, pulling at my ankles. Suddenly, I heard a faint sound, faint but growing louder. A ringing. The same ringing that had plagued me for days, echoing in my ears. The same as when the phone call had first come. But this time, it was louder, more insistent. I stumbled forward, the sound growing in intensity with every step. I couldn't tell where it was coming from. It was everywhere, vibrating through the air, through my body. And then I saw it. A faint glowing light flickered in the distance. A distant beacon in the suffocating dark. I was drawn to it like a moth to flame. I ran toward it, my feet stumbling, my breath ragged and frantic. As I neared the light, the air grew colder, the ground beneath me slick with ice. My heart raced as I stepped into the glow, and the world seemed to snap into focus. I was standing in a familiar room. It was my own bedroom. But something was wrong. The walls were cracked and peeling, the floor littered with shards of broken glass. The bed, once neat, was disheveled, the sheets torn. And the air was thick with the stench of decay. I froze, my body locked in place. My eyes darted around the room, searching for any sign of life, any hint of movement. But there was nothing. Nothing but the silence in the glass. And then I heard it. This soft whisper, barely audible, coming from the corner of the room. "Hello?" The voice. My voice. It sent a shiver down my spine. The words were familiar, but distorted, like they were coming from a different time, a different place. I turned toward the corner, but no one was there. The room was empty. "Who's there?" I whispered, my voice trembling. My eyes flicked to the phone on the nightstand. The same phone that had called me. The phone that had been shattered. I reached out toward it, my hand trembling as I picked it up. It was still cracked, the screen flickering with a soft, eerie light. But it wasn't broken anymore. The screen was intact, the buttons glowing faintly in the dim light. I pressed the power button and the phone came to life. The screen flickered to life, and there was the same unknown number, calling again. I hesitated for a moment. My heart pounded in my chest. Should I answer? Should I ignore it? The last time I picked up, I ended up hearing this nightmare. But something inside me snapped. I had to know. I had to understand what was happening. With shaking hands, I pressed the green button. The line clicked, and then, just like before, the voice filled the air. "You should have never answered," it said, its voice cold and distant. But this time, it wasn't my voice. It wasn't even human. The voice was monstrous. Faint, guttural whispers mixed with the sharp, haunting sound of breaking glass. My breath caught in my throat as the sound grew louder, more distorted. The glass shards on the floor began to rattle, and the wall seemed to tremble. I tried to hang up, but the phone wouldn't budge. It was as though the call had a grip on me, refusing to let go. And then, a sharp crack filled the room. I turned just in time to see the bedroom door slam open with a force that rattled the windows. The room grew colder, the shadows stretching unnaturally long. Out of the darkness, a figure stepped into the room. It was him. Adam. But he was different. His eyes were wide with terror, his face pale, and his clothes were torn, as though he had been dragged through something horrible. His movements were jerky, disjointed, like he wasn't entirely in control of his own body. "Help me," he whispered, his voice hollow, barely a breath. "Help me escape." I took a step toward him, but before I could reach him, his form flickered. It vanished in an instant, like a mirage, leaving only the sound of the phone ringing. I looked down at the phone. The screen was now cracked again. The number on the screen had changed. It was my number, but it wasn't me calling. I could feel something cold, something terrible rising from the depths of my past, pulling me closer to the nightmare I had tried to escape. And just as I felt the cold hands of the darkness wrap around my neck, the phone rang once more. The voice on the other end was waiting, and this time it spoke a single word. One. I hope you enjoyed the first story. If you did, don't forget to leave a like. But if I didn't do my job well, feel free to give it a thumbs down. Either way, drop a comment and let us know where you're listening from and what time it is for you. Now, let us continue. It was just a message. That is what I kept telling myself. Harmless, unimportant text. But as I stared at the screen of my phone, I felt a chill run down my spine. The message had come from an unknown number, and it read, "You haven't read these messages yet, but now everything will change." I had ignored it at first. I always ignored messages from unknown numbers, especially ones that seemed so strange, so unsettling. But it didn't stop there. Every time I unlocked my phone, it was there waiting. The same cryptic message repeated over and over. Each time, the words seemed to echo louder in my mind. I wasn't sure why, but I had an overwhelming sense that I couldn't just leave it alone. I tried to forget about it to focus on something else, but the words gnawed at me. They became a part of the quiet moments of my day, a low hum in the background of everything I did. I lived alone in a small apartment on the top floor of an aging building. The kind of place you'd never expect to be anything other than ordinary. But as night fell, something about the quiet felt off. A kind of silence that doesn't soothe, but suffocates. My apartment was dimly lit by the weak glow of the street lights outside, casting long, slanted shadows across the wooden floor. It wasn't particularly cold, but I found myself shivering as I stood by the window, watching the shadows stretch and dance in the darkness. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, but the rhythm felt wrong. I shook it off, telling myself it was just nerves, maybe from lack of sleep. But then, as I turned away from the window, a sudden sound stopped me in my tracks. It was subtle at first, a faint tapping, almost like a finger gently brushing against the wood. I glanced toward the door, heart racing, but there was nothing, just the shadows still and unmoving. I went to bed that night, but sleep didn't come easily. The message flashed in my mind, an uninvited thought growing louder with every passing minute. What did it mean? I tried to push it away, but as I lay in bed, eyes closed, I could swear I heard something in the other room, a soft rustle, like the sound of something shifting. A draft? No, the windows were shut. My heart began to pound, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. I reached for my phone, hoping to distract myself with something familiar, something normal. I unlocked the screen, my thumb hovering over the unread message. I could feel my pulse in my fingertips, but somehow I couldn't stop myself. I opened it. The message was still there, but something was different. A new line had appeared below the original text. "Are you ready for what comes next?" I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. I couldn't explain why, but the words felt like they were pressing against me, suffocating me. It was as if the phone itself had become a part of the atmosphere, breathing the same cold air I was breathing, filling the space around me with a sense of dread. I closed the message, but the discomfort lingered, lingering in the corners of the room. My eyes darted around, and I thought I saw something move in the shadows. But when I looked directly at it, nothing was there. I tried to tell myself it was just the darkness playing tricks on me, but the longer I sat there, the more real the shadows seemed to become. And that was when I heard it. A soft whisper, almost inaudible, coming from somewhere behind me. It was so faint that I thought I might have imagined it. But then, it came again closer this time, like someone was standing right behind me, breathing down my neck. "You can ignore me forever." I froze. I wanted to turn around to confront whatever it was, but my body refused to move. I could feel my pulse in my throat, my breath shallow. I didn't know whether to scream or to run. But no matter what I did, I couldn't escape the sense of being watched. And then the phone buzzed again. Another message. The same number. The same unsettling words. Now you reread it, now you read part of it. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew I had just crossed a line. And I didn't know how far this thing, whatever it was willing to go. The room was still too still. My phone buzzed again, and I jumped, heart thudding violently in my chest. The message was there, just as before, waiting for me. "You can't escape me." The words were as clear as if someone had whispered them into my ear. I sat frozen, staring at the glowing screen, unable to tear my eyes away. The message kept repeating in my mind, over and over. "You can escape me." It felt like a threat, but it also felt inevitable, as though something far beyond my control was tightening its grip around me. I dropped the phone onto the bed, unable to look at it any longer. My breath was shallow, my pulse racing. The whisper from before still echoed in my mind, the voice so close, I could almost feel it at the back of my neck. My body was tense, on edge, as if waiting for something to break the silence. The quiet in the apartment became oppressive, a weight pressing down on my chest. I tried to shake it off, tried to ignore the sense that I was being watched. But it was impossible to ignore. The shadows in the room seemed deeper now, more menacing. Every corner felt like it hid something, something just out of sight, something waiting for me to look away for just a moment. I turned to the window. The street outside was empty, the lamplights casting long, pale beams across the asphalt. But the longer I looked, the more uneasy I became. The shadows cast by the streetlights didn't look quite right. They shifted unnaturally, stretching toward the windows, as if trying to reach me. My phone buzzed again, cutting through the silence like a sharp knife. I snatched it up, desperate to see what it said, though part of me didn't want to know. The screen was already glowing, showing me the same number, the same message. I am closer now. Panic rose within me. The words hit me like a physical blow, my breath catching in my throat. My mind screamed at me to run, to get up, to leave the apartment. But I couldn't move. It was as though the air had thickened, and my body was trapped in place, frozen by some unseen force. Then a noise. A soft scraping sound, faint at first, but growing louder. The sound of something moving, something dragging itself across the floor. It was coming from the hallway outside my room. My heart leapt in my chest. The noise grew louder, closer, and I could feel it in my bones. Whatever it was approaching. But I couldn't move. I couldn't even breathe. The scraping stopped just outside my door, and for a moment, everything was silent. My mind raced, fighting to make sense of what was happening. It was too much. The message, the strange sounds, the shadows, it was all adding up to something I couldn't understand, couldn't explain. Then the door creaked. A slow, agonizing sound as it began to open by itself, the hinges groaning in protest. I stared at it, wide-eyed, my heart pounding so loudly I thought it would burst. The door was opening wider, inch by inch, though I had not moved. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt a cold sweat break out across my forehead. And then I saw it. A figure dark and shapeless emerged from the shadows. It moved in a way that didn't make sense. It glided like something unnatural, something that wasn't supposed to exist. At first, I couldn't make out its shape, but as it stepped closer, I saw its form more clearly. It had no face. There was just an empty space where one should have been. A void. The rest of its body was just a blur, a shifting mass of darkness that seemed to consume the light around it. The edges of its form twisted and reformed, like smoke caught in a gust of wind. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. My throat was dry, tight, as if it were being squeezed by invisible hands. The figure stepped forward again, and I stumbled back, my legs weak, my body trembling in terror. The thing was closer now, and I could feel its presence as if it were right next to me, brushing against my skin, but I couldn't see it fully. The edges of its form twisted, and I swore I saw something move within it, a glimpse of something. Eyes. I closed my eyes, desperate to escape the sight of it. But when I opened them again, it was still there, standing in the doorway, its presence filling the room. I could feel its weight pressing down on me, suffocating me. And then the voice came again. But this time, it wasn't a whisper. It was a low, guttural sound, as if the thing was speaking directly into my mind. You shouldn't have read it, now you read part of it, just like me. The words slithered through my thoughts, turning everything inside me cold. My body felt heavy, as though the weight of the thing was pulling me into the floor. I stumbled back, desperate to get away, but I couldn't I couldn't move, couldn't think. I was trapped. Trapped in my own apartment, trapped with something that didn't belong. And then, without warning, the figure lunged toward me. I felt it coming, but I couldn't react in time. In the next moment, everything went black. I woke up gasping, my body drenched in cold sweat. The room was still dark, but there was something wrong about the silence. It was too quiet, the kind of quiet that felt heavy, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I blinked, disoriented, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. The figure, had it been real? My heart raced as the memories flooded back. I remembered its presence, cold, dark, and wrong, but I couldn't tell if it had been a dream or something else. I sat up in bed, my hand shaking. The familiar surroundings of my apartment felt different now, distorted somehow. The shadows in the corners of the room were deeper, stretching further than they should have. The air felt thick, as though it were closing in on me, suffocating me. I looked at my phone, still lying on the bed beside me. My fingers moved toward it slowly, as if they were hesitant to touch it. But I had to know. The message had to change again? I unlocked the phone, feeling a chill creep down my spine as the screen lit up. The message was there. It had returned. You didn't think it would end like that, did you? I swallowed hard, a lump forming in my throat. How could it know what I was thinking? How could it know what I had felt? It was as though the message had become more personal, more invasive. I quickly glanced around the room, as though expecting something to appear from the shadows. The silence was deafening, but my skin prickled with the feeling that I wasn't alone. I jumped when the phone buzzed again, interrupting my spiraling thoughts. I was almost afraid to look, but I couldn't resist. The screen flickered briefly before revealing the next message. You shouldn't have opened it, now there's no going back. The words were like ice in my veins. I stared at them, trying to understand, trying to convince myself that this was just some elaborate prank. But deep down I knew it wasn't. Something was wrong. Something far beyond my understanding was happening, and I had no idea how to stop it. I stood up, the room spinning slightly. My legs felt weak, like they couldn't support my weight. I needed air. I needed to get out of this apartment, away from the oppressive walls and the suffocating silence. I needed to escape whatever this thing was that had a hold on me. I stumbled toward the door, my fingers trembling as I reached for the handle. But as soon as my hand touched it, I froze. A sharp, biting cold surged through my fingertips, and for a brief moment I thought I felt something else, something alive moving just beneath the surface of the door. It was as if the wood itself was breathing. I pulled my hand away, my breath coming in ragged gasps. What was happening to me? Was it my mind playing tricks, or was something truly out of place? Then the phone buzzed again. It is too late. I snapped my eyes back to the screen, my body tense with dread. The words felt like they were searing into my skull, each one a nail driving deeper into my thoughts. I couldn't stay here anymore. I couldn't breathe in this air. Couldn't keep feeling like something was lurking just out of sight, watching me, waiting. I needed to leave, needed to get away from the apartment, away from the phone, away from the messages. I bolted for the door, my heart pounding in my chest. My hand shook as I turned the handle, but this time the door opened. The hallway beyond was dimly lit, the only sound the faint hum of the lights above. It seemed normal. but the air felt wrong, thick with an unnatural stillness. I stepped into the hallway, my footsteps echoing too lovely in the silence. My apartment door shut behind me, and for a moment I stood there unsure of what to do next. The building felt empty, far too quiet for a place that should be full of life. My feet carried me forward down the narrow hallway, each step taking me further from the safety of my apartment and deeper into the unknown. Then I heard it. A soft shuffling sound coming from behind me. I spun around, but there was nothing there, just a long, empty hallway stretching into the dark. My breath quickened as the shuffling grew louder or closer. It sounded like footsteps, but they were slow, deliberate, dragging, as if something or someone was moving toward me. I froze in place, heart thudding in my chest. I wanted to run, to turn and escape, but my body refused to obey. It was as if my feet were glued to the floor. The footsteps grew louder, and I could feel the presence behind me now, as if something was standing just beyond my reach. I dared not turn around, but I could feel it. I could feel its gaze on me, cold and unrelenting. And then a whisper, soft but clear as day, came from the shadows. "I am closer than you think." My blood ran cold. I didn't know whether to scream or run. But before I could move, before I could react, the air around me changed. The temperature dropped, the warmth of the building evaporating into a chilling frost. I could see my breath in front of me hanging in the air like smoke. I looked down at my phone. The screen was now dark, the glow gone. But I could feel it. The connection was still there. Whatever was on the other side, whatever had been sending those messages, was still with me. Watching. Waiting. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I hadn't escaped. The message wasn't just a text. It was a presence. And it wasn't done with me yet. I wanted to run. My legs screamed for movement, but they betrayed me, locking me in place. The temperature around me had plunged, and I could feel the icy chill biting into my skin, making my bones ache with cold. My breath came in shallow, ragged gasps, fogging the air before disappearing like smoke. It felt wrong. Everything felt wrong. The shuffling sound stopped abruptly, and for a moment the silence seemed even more suffocating than before. I stood frozen, not daring to move, not daring to even breathe. Then it came again, a soft, dragging sound, closer now, like something moving in the shadows just beyond my reach. The footsteps were slow, deliberate, and it was as if the air itself was thickening, suffocating me with the weight of whatever was coming. I forced myself to turn, but my gaze was locked on the dim hallway ahead of me. The walls, once familiar, now seemed to stretch unnaturally, the edges bending, warping in a corner of my vision. The low hum of the lights above seemed to vibrate in my skull, sending a pulse through my body that made my teeth ache. Something was wrong with the building itself. It wasn't just the air, it was the entire space. The hole stretched farther than it should have. The walls appeared to ripple, like fabric in the wind, but there was no breeze. The building was alive. My mind raced, trying to find any logical explanation, but every thought was drowned out by the overwhelming presence behind me. Whatever it was getting closer. I could hear its breath, shallow and raspy, like it was struggling to stay concealed, fighting against the force that held it back. And then a low whisper echoed from the darkness. "I told you can't escape me." The words seeped into my bones, sending a wave of icy dread crashing through my chest. It was the same voice, the one from the messages. But it wasn't just in my head now. It was real, its voice wrapping itself around me like a noose. My heart pounded in my chest, and I took a step forward, then another, as if my feet had a mind of their own. The hallway seemed to shift and sway as I moved, the walls leaning in, the lights flickering as if they were struggling to stay lit. The whispers grew louder, swirling around me, echoing off the walls. I kept my eyes straight ahead, refusing to look behind me, but I could feel it. The thing was there, somewhere in the shadows. It was watching me. Suddenly a door on my left creaked open. It was ajar, and for a moment I saw a flash of dim light from inside. A hallway leading into another room. A room I had never seen before. Without thinking, I stumbled toward it, my breath quickening. I needed to hide. I needed to get away from whatever was stalking me. I didn't know if the door was safe or if it would lead me into another nightmare, but I had no choice. I pushed the door open, feeling the wood groan under my hand, and stepped inside. The room was small, dimly lit by a single light bulb hanging from the ceiling. It was cramped, and the air smelled damp, stale, like something had been sealed in here for years. My eyes scanned the room frantically, searching for something, anything that might give me some semblance of safety. But the walls, there were things on them. Scribbles. Skulls. Words written in something dark, something that almost looked like blood. I stepped closer to the wall, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. The words didn't make sense. They were disjointed, frantic, as though they had been written in haste by someone or something desperate to leave a message. It is coming. It has always been here. Don T, look at the eyes. I can hear it. It is closer now. Don T, open the door. I backed away from the wall, my mind racing. What had happened in this room? Why were these messages written here? Who had been here before me? I was starting to lose my grip on reality, and the oppressive weight in the room wasn't helping. The whispers came again, louder now. They surrounded me, coming from all directions, like a chorus of voices, overlapping, indistinguishable. They were coming from inside my head, and yet they felt so real, as though they were speaking from the walls themselves. You shouldn't have come here. You could hide from me. You are mine now. I spun around, panic flooding my chest. The room was closing in, the walls bending in on themselves, the air thickening, choking me. The light above flickered violently, casting the room in an eerie, strobing light that distorted the shapes around me. The shadows twisted, and I could see something moving within them, shapes that didn't belong. A figure appeared in the doorway. It was a silhouette, tall and thin, barely visible in the dim light, but I could feel its presence like a weight on my chest. I couldn't see its face, but I could feel its eyes on me. Eyes that were dark, empty, hollow. I froze, my mind screaming at me to run, but my legs wouldn't move. I was trapped. Trapped in this room, trapped with this thing. The whispers had stopped, but the silence that followed was even worse. It was suffocating, pressing in from all sides. And then in the silence I heard it again. A voice low, guttural, like a breath drawn from the depths of the earth. It is too late, there is no escape. The room seemed to pulse, and I felt my knees buckle beneath me. I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The walls were closing in, the shadows were moving, and the presence was too close. It was all too much. I reached for the door, my hand trembling as I fumbled for the handle, but before I could even touch it, the figure in the doorway stepped forward. Its form stretched, distorted, its limbs elongating in impossible ways. The shadows wrapped around it like a cloak, and I could see its face, or what should have been its face. It was just a void. A black hole where its features should have been, an endless abyss that seemed to suck all light into it. I screamed, but no sound came out. My throat was dry, as if the air had been sucked from my lungs. And as I watched, unable to move, the figure reached out, its hand closing around my wrist like a vise. And then everything went black. I woke with a gasp, my body jerking upright as though I had been yanked from a nightmare. But the nightmare wasn't over. It had never left. My vision was blurry at first, but as my eyes adjusted, I realized I wasn't in the small, suffocating room anymore. The air was thick, still, and the familiar hum of the lights above was gone. Instead, there was only silence, broken only by the rapid thumping of my heartbeat in my chest. I was lying on the cold floor, my clothes damp with sweat, and for a moment I simply couldn't process where I was. The room around me was strange dim, with no discernible windows, the walls covered in a thick, dark fog. My breath came in shallow gasps as I pushed myself up, blinking rapidly, trying to clear the haze from my vision. Where was I? I looked around, my heart sinking. The room had no doors, no windows. It was like a cage, a space that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions. The walls were made of stone cold, rough and unyielding. There were no seams, no signs of life. Just a vast emptiness that felt like it was pressing in on me from all sides. And the shadows, they were moving again. The blackness in the corners of the room seemed to ripple, as though alive. The shadows stretched, distorted, twisting unnaturally, crawling up the walls like they had a mind of their own. I could feel them closing in on me, like an inescapable, invisible force. It was as if the very fabric of the space had begun to fold around me, trapping me in some otherworldly prison. I stumbled to my feet, my knees weak beneath me, but I forced myself to stand. My hands were shaking uncontrollably, and my mind was a whirl of confusion. How had I gotten here? What had happened? The last thing I remembered was the figure in the doorway, the dark, empty void where its face should have been and the touch. The hand that had grabbed my wrist. But now there was nothing. No figure. No escape. I reached into my pocket, desperate for my phone, but it wasn't either. Panic gripped me as I searched my body, my heart pounding harder with each passing second. The phone, those messages, it was all that had kept me tethered to some semblance of reality. If I didn't have it, I wasn't sure I could even remember who I was. Then I felt it. The coldness. A faint buzz against my thigh. I yanked my hand out of my pocket, and there was my phone. But the screen was cracked, the glass spider webbed into jagged lines, and yet the familiar glow flickered back to life. I hesitated for a second, almost afraid of what I might see, but the screen seemed to beckon me, pulling me closer. And then it buzzed again. The message flashed. You didn't think you could get away, did you? The words made my stomach turn. I was here. Wherever here was, this was where it wanted me to be. It was real. Whatever this thing was, whatever it had done to me, it wasn't just some trick. It was controlling everything, manipulating every aspect of my life. There was no way out. My hands were slick with sweat as I typed, heart racing. I needed to respond. I needed to ask and no demand answers. But as soon as my fingers touched the screen, something strange happened. The text changed. It wasn't my words anymore. It was as if the phone had a mind of its own, and it was writing for me. The screen shifted, the letters on it dancing in strange patterns before they solidified into words. You belong here now. The door's closed. I shook my head, staring at the screen. The words blurred before me. This couldn't be real. It couldn't be. I looked around the room again, my mind scrambling for any shred of logic. There had to be an explanation. I had to be dreaming. But it didn't feel like a dream. The cold, the silence, the thick fog that seemed to press in on me, it was all too real. The phone buzzed again, the screen flashing with an incoming message. Do you hear it? I froze, the blood in my veins turning to ice. The phone screen began to flicker, and for the briefest of moments, I thought I saw a figure standing in the shadows, a glimpse of something dark, moving just out of reach. I spun around, my pulse hammering in my throat, but there was nothing there. Or at least, nothing I could see. I could hear it, though. The sound was faint at first, just a whisper in the air. But it was getting louder, growing clearer. The whispers, soft and slithering, echoing from all directions. It was as if they were inside my mind, crawling under my skin, burrowing deeper with each passing second. You can hide. That's already inside you. The words were seeping into my thoughts, making my head spin. I felt like I was losing control, like I was slipping away into someone else. I slammed the phone down onto the ground, the screen cracking further, but the whispers didn't stop. They didn't fade. If anything, they grew stronger, more insistent. It was as if they were coming from the walls, from the very air around me. I had to leave. I had to get out. But there was nowhere to go. The room was endless, the shadows closing in, suffocating me. I could feel it now, the presence hovering just out of sight. And then I heard the footsteps again. Soft, slow, deliberate, as though someone or something was moving toward me. I spun around, my heart in my throat, but there was nothing there. Only darkness. The footsteps stopped. I felt it before I saw it. A cold hand brushed the back of my neck. I gasped, my body locking in place, my breath frozen in my chest. The darkness deepened, swallowing everything, and I felt that the presence behind me, the figure that had been watching me since the beginning, its cold breath on my skin, its hand lingering on my shoulder. It is too late. And then the world went black. I don't know if I was prepared for what I would find when I stepped back into my apartment. The thought that it could be anything but normal never crossed my mind. But as I'd opened the door and stepped inside, the atmosphere hit me immediately. It wasn't the quiet I remembered. It wasn't the familiar comfort of my space. Something was wrong. The apartment looked the same, but not. The same walls. The same worn wooden floorboards. Yet, the air felt thick, dense, like it was trying to haunt me in place. The silence was overwhelming. Not the peaceful, safe kind of silence, but one that made me feel like I was being watched. The kind that makes you glance over your shoulder when you reassure there is no one there. I hadn't been gone long, only a few months, and yet everything seemed off. The couch, which used to sit by the window, was now pressed up against the far wall. The pictures on the walls were crooked, as if someone had haphazardly thrown them up. My bookshelves were rearranged. Books I knew were on the left were now on the right. Everything was just a little wrong. I stood frozen in the entryway, my hand still gripping the door handle, but I couldn't make myself move. My mind was racing. Was I just tired? Had I forgotten how the apartment was laid out? I had been away for a while, after all, but the feeling in my stomach, the knot that kept tightening, told me something deeper was wrong. I glanced around, my eyes darting from one corner to the next, trying to find some semblance of normality. The hallway to the bathroom seemed unchanged, but the light above flickered, casting long, strange shadows on the walls. The small kitchen, the one I always considered cozy, was now cold, uninviting space. Even the smell was off. Something faint, something sour, was hanging in the air. And that is when I heard it. A soft creak, like footsteps on the floor behind me. I spun around, my heart slamming against my chest. There was nothing there. The air in the room seemed to grow heavier with each second, and I realized I wasn't alone. I could feel it. The presence. It was as if someone, was there in the room with me, just out of sight. My breath caught in my throat as I slowly backed toward the living room, unable to shake the feeling of eyes on me. Then I saw it. The chair by the window where I always sat to read was facing the wrong way. I had never left it like that. It was impossible. I was sure of it. I walked closer, each step heavy and slow, as though the floor was trying to pull me down. When I reached it, I hesitated before turning it around, my fingers gripping the back of the chair tightly. But the moment I turned it, my stomach churned. The chair was empty. Too empty. There, on the seat, was a single, old photograph. My photo. From years ago. It was of me standing by the lake, smiling, carefree. But something was different about the photo now. The edges were burnt charred, as though it had been through something terrible. A shiver ran down my spine, and I stumbled back from the chair, my head swimming. I was seeing things. It had to be. But the photo, it wasn't just there by accident. It couldn't have been. Then, my phone buzzed in my pocket. The sudden noise made me jump, and for a moment I was grateful for the distraction. I pulled the phone out, only to find a message waiting for me. The screen was cracked, but the message was clear. Welcome home. A chill ran through me, and I stood frozen, staring at the screen as if it could somehow explain everything. But it couldn't. It didn't make sense. I needed to find out what was happening. Was I losing my mind? Or was there someone else in the apartment with me? But no, there were no other signs of life. No footprints in the dust. No fresh sounds. Just a thick, suffocating silence. I walked further into the apartment, my footsteps too quiet against the creaking floorboards. The bathroom door was ajar. I hadn't left it that way. I was sure of it. I slowly approached, my body rigid, and peeked inside. The bathroom was pristine. too pristine. There was no sign of the soap I left on the counter, no towel hanging by the shower. It was as though someone had erased all the traces of my life in that room. But then, my eyes landed on the mirror. The reflection staring back at me wasn't mine. I blinked, taking a step back. But there it was again, someone standing in the mirror, dressed in my clothes, wearing my face, but the eyes weren't mine. They were dark, hollow, empty. I gasped, stumbling back, and the reflection followed me. You shouldn't have come back. The words echoed through my mind like a distant scream. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached for the door, only to hear the sound of something moving in the hallway. The quiet hum of the air conditioner suddenly seemed louder, sharper. On the floor beneath my feet, it felt like it was shifting. I spun around again, my eyes wild, desperate for something to hold on to. But the apartment it wasn't, just rearranged. It was changing. It was alive. A sudden chill ran through me, and I spun around, facing the dark hallway. The air was thick, suffocating. Something was washing me. Something that wasn't human. I am sorry, I whispered to myself, my breath quickening. But it didn't feel like an apology. It felt like a plea. A warning. I needed to get out. But I couldn't remember how. I bolted from the bathroom, my breath ragged, my mind screaming at me to run. I had to get out of there to escape whatever it was that had taken hold of my apartment, of my mind. But my legs felt like Lee, my body moving in slow motion, weighed down by an invisible force. Every step felt as if the floor was shifting beneath me, each sound amplified, twisting my nerves until I couldn't tell what was real and what was my imagination. The hallway was longer than I remembered. Had it always been this long? The walls seemed to stretch out further, the shadows in the corners growing darker and more alive with every second. I tried to tell myself that this was just a trick of the light, the darkness playing with my eyes, but the unsettling feeling was undeniable. It was as though the apartment itself was warping, changing shape, bending reality to its will. I reached the front door, my fingers trembling as I fumbled with the lock. The metal felt cold against my skin, and the air seemed to pulse around me, thick with the smell of something burnt, something familiar and wrong. The key slipped from my hand and clattered to the floor, but before I could pick it up, a noise stopped me. Footsteps. They were faint at first, just a slight creak of the floor, but as they grew louder, I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs. The footsteps were too deliberate, too close. Someone or something was walking toward me. I turned slowly, hoping it was nothing, praying it was nothing, but I knew deep down that it wasn't he. And then I saw a figure, barely visible, standing at the end of the hallway, its shape dark and indistinct. It was too tall, too unnaturally still. My mind couldn't process what I was looking at. The figure was cloaked in shadow, but I could make out the outline of a face, my face pale and lifeless, staring back at me with eyes that weren't mine. They were hollow, deep, as if they could look right into my soul. I stumbled backward, my hands flying to my face as I gasped for air. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. It simply watched. I could feel it. The weight of its gaze pressing on me, suffocating me. I needed to get out. I needed to leave. But as I reached for the door again, I noticed something else. The hallway was closing in on me. The walls were moving, ever so slightly, as though they were pushing me back into the apartment. The door seemed further away now, impossible to reach. The very space I was standing in was shifting, warping, tightening around me like a noose. I turned back to face the figure. It hadn't moved an inch, but its presence was overpowering, and I could feel the heat of it, the dread radiating from its direction. I opened my mouth to scream, but the sound caught in my throat. My voice was gone, stolen by the oppressive silence that had now consumed the apartment. For a moment there was nothing. No sound, no movement, just the unbearable stillness. And then I heard it again. The footsteps. Only this time they weren't coming from the end of the hallway. They were coming from behind me, soft at first, but growing louder, closer. I whirled around, my eyes frantic as I searched for the source of the noise. But there was nothing. Just the emptiness. The apartment was empty, wasn't it? It is all in my head, I told myself. It is all in your head. But the footsteps kept coming. Closer. Closer. Until they were right behind me. My body went rigid with terror as I felt something brush against the back of my neck, cold and clammy. I whipped around, but there was no one there. Just the empty air. But then I heard the whisper, a voice that was not mine, not anyone else that I recognized. It was a low, rasping sound, like a breath or a sigh, carrying words I couldn't understand. The words were broken, fragmented, as if they didn't belong in the world at all. I pressed my hands to my ears, desperate to block out the noise, but it only grew louder, more insistent. The words unintelligible, maddening slithered into my mind, creeping under my skin, until I felt like I was drowning in them. He real, not real. The words hit me like a slap in the face, and for a moment everything went still. The apartment was silent again, the air thick with tension. My heart beat in my ears, but I could no longer hear the voice. I could no longer hear the footsteps. I looked around, trying to make sense of what was happening, trying to find something, anything that could explain this nightmare. But nothing made sense. The apartment was the same, yet it wasn't. The walls were too close, the air too thick. I turned back toward the hallway, hoping to find the exit, hoping that this nightmare was finally over. But there was something different now. The end of the hallway was blocked. The door of my door was gone. It had vanished. In its place was a mirror. A full-length mirror standing at the end of the hallway, reflecting the dark space around me. But when I looked closer, I saw someone in the reflection. It was me. No, it was not me. The figure in the mirror moved, stepped forward, and I felt my legs give way beneath me. I collapsed to the floor, my breath coming in gasps, my mind spinning out of control. The figure in the mirror was smiling, a twisted, broken smile that wasn't my own. And in that smile, I saw something terrible. It wasn't just me in the mirror. There was another face. A face I didn't recognize, but somehow I knew. And then, the apartment was silent once more. But I was no longer sure if I was alone. The silence was suffocating. Every inch of the apartment felt like it was pressing on me, the walls bending closer, the air thick with a heaviness that made it hard to breathe. My mind spun in circles, grasping for anything that made sense. But nothing did. The figure in the mirror, my reflection, hadn't moved. It was as if it was waiting for me to do something. To acknowledge it. To make a decision. But what could I do? I couldn't move. I couldn't think. My body refused to obey, my legs frozen to the floor, my chest tight with panic. The face in the reflection that faced it was mine, but it wasn't. There was something deeply wrong with it, something that made the blood in my veins run cold. The smile. The eyes. It was like I was looking into a version of myself that had been twisted, warped beyond recognition. I reached out a trembling hand, my fingers grazing the smooth surface of the mirror. The coldness of it shot through me like a jolt of electricity, and I pulled my hand back, heart pounding in my throat. The reflection hadn't changed. But the feeling that something was wrong, that everything was wrong, it only deepened. I forced myself to stand, my knees weak, but somehow still holding me up. My eyes locked onto the mirror, unwilling to look away, to let whatever was lurking there take hold of me. But the longer I stared, the more I felt like I was losing myself to it. The longer I looked, the more I became convinced that the reflection wasn't just a mirror image anymore. It was me, but not the me that existed in the real world. I stepped backward slowly, still unable to tear my gaze away from the mirror. And that's when I heard it. A sound of light, almost imperceptible rustling. It came from behind me, from somewhere deep within the apartment. I froze. My breath caught in my chest. My eyes shot toward the hallway, but it was empty. Or was it? The rustling came again, closer this time. It was the unmistakable sound of something moving, something shifting through the rooms. The weight of it pressed against me, and I couldn't tell if it was real or just a figment of my imagination. But my instinct screamed at me to leave. Tehran. I turned away from the mirror, trying to steady myself. My hands were clammy as I clutched the doorframe, my mind spiraling, lost in the confusion of what was real. This isn't real. This isn't real. But even as I said it, I could feel the truth slipping away, like sand through my fingers. Everything in the apartment felt wrong. The shadows seemed to move on their own, stretching and contorting in ways that defied logic. The air smelled different now, damp, stale, like something had been rotting in the corners of the rooms. I stumbled down the hallway, my feet dragging, the darkness around me closing in. The rustling sound was louder now. It was coming from the living room, from the very space where I had once felt safe. I approached slowly, my heart thundering in my chest. Every nerve in my body was screaming at me to turn back, but I couldn't. I had to know. When I reached the living room, I stopped in my tracks. The furniture had changed again. It wasn't like before, when the books had been slightly misplaced or the chairs shuffled around. This time, it was different. The couch was facing the wrong way, turned toward the wall. The coffee table broken in half lay in pieces scattered across the floor. The bookshelf was upside down, the books spilling out, their pages torn, as though something had violently ripped through them. And then I saw it. The same figure from the mirror. Standing in the corner, its shape hidden by the darkness. The same face. The same twisted smile. But now, it was no longer just a reflection. It was real. Or at least it looked real. The longer I stared at it, the more it felt like it was alive, watching me. It was just standing there, moving, but I knew that it was waiting for me to make the next move. It wasn't a mirror image anymore. It was something else. I wanted to scream. To run. To break free from the suffocating grip of this apartment. But the sound of my own breath, the shallow, gasping air filled the room, drowning out everything else. The figure moved then. Slowly. Deliberately. Its head turned toward me, and I felt my pulse spike in terror. Its eyes, those hollow, black eyes locked with mine, and for a split second I thought I could see something in them. Something behind the eyes. A presence. A force that wasn't human. Leave. The voice was soft. Barely a whisper. But it echoed in my head, vibrating through my skull. My body reacted before my mind could process it. I took a step back, then another, my heart thundering in my chest. Leave. It was the same voice, but it wasn't mine. It wasn't its voice either. It was something older. Something wrong. I turned to run. To get out of there. But the hole in my hallway was different now. The walls were closing in, the space too narrow to escape. I had no choice but to move forward to face whatever waited at the end of this nightmare. I glanced back. The figure was still there, but now it was closer, its face so near that I could feel the air shift as it moved. My legs moved without thought, propelling me forward, but the ground beneath me wasn't right. The floor tilted. The walls seemed to twist. It felt like the apartment itself was alive, changing its shape, its form. And then I saw it. The door. The front door. It was just ahead. I could feel it. I was so close. But as I reached for the handle, something behind me, something cold, something dark brushed against my shoulder. I spun around. Nothing. Just the empty, shifting hallway. But I knew. I knew that I was not alone anymore. I had to get out. The door. The hallway. The feeling of something watching me had all fused together in a cacophony of panic. My breath was shallow, my chest tight, but I couldn't stop. Every step I took seemed to lead me nowhere, the hallway stretching out longer, the door slipping farther away. My fingers tightened around the cold metal handle, but as soon as I touched it, the entire apartment seemed to shudder. A low hum reverberated through the walls, vibrating my bones, and the light flickered above me, casting distorted shadows that flickered in every corner. The sensation of being followed, of something lurking just behind me, gripped me, and I spun around again. But there was nothing there. Only darkness. But that wasn't true. I could feel it. Something was there. something waiting. The air grew thicker, heavier. I could almost taste it like something old, stagnant. Like it had been sitting in this place for years, growing, festering, until now. Until it had decided to wake up. The door wouldn't open. I twisted the handle again, desperate now, my palms slick with sweat. The room was closing in on me, the air feeling almost solid, pushing against my chest, forcing me to stay. I yanked the door harder, but it wouldn't budge. I had to get out. I had to. Help. My voice cracked, barely a whisper, as if the walls themselves were swallowing my words. Then the hum stopped. For one brief moment there was silence. And that silence was worse than the noise. A heavy, deliberate step echoed from the far corner of the room. I froze, my blood running cold. The step was slow, but calculated, as if someone or something was pacing, taking its time with me. I turned, my heart pounding in my throat, ready to face whatever was behind me. But nothing was there. Only darkness. The longer I stared, the more I could feel the eyes on me. It was like I was being studied, analyzed, as if whatever was in this apartment wanted to understand me, to know me. And then the sound came again, the shuffling of feet, the rustling of fabric. This time closer. So close I could hear the breath. I spun almost violently to face the source. There, at the far end of the hallway, stood a figure. It wasn't clear, not at first. The shadows had formed around it, clinging to its shape like dark tendrils, making it hard to see. But the more I stared, the more it came into focus. It was human. But it wasn't It was tall, unnaturally tall, with a thin, gaunt figure. Its limbs were long and spindly, bent at odd angles that didn't seem quite right. The face, if it could be called that, was twisted, stretched in a grotesque manner, like a distorted mask. I couldn't see its eyes, but I felt them. And its mouth, it was stretched too wide, hanging open, revealing rows of sharp, uneven teeth that glistened in the dim light. For a moment I couldn't move. My body felt frozen, paralyzed by the sight of it. And then it spoke. Eerie still here. Its voice was like 1,000 whispers, all layered over one another, too many to distinguish. It was cold, cutting through the silence with an unnatural sharpness. I couldn't reply. The words were lodged in my throat, and I feared I could feel it crawling inside me, a cold weight pressing against my chest. The figure took a step forward. And another. Each movement was slow, deliberate, like it was savoring my terror. It was too quiet, the air too still, and the hum of the apartment now gone was replaced by the sound of my own heartbeat thumping in my ears. I backed up, still clutching the door handle, but it was no use. The space around me felt infinite now, the walls too far away to escape. It was closing in from all sides. The thing in front of me didn't hurry. It didn't rush. But its presence was overwhelming, suffocating. "Why do you still stay?" It asked again, its voice lingering in the air, like the words were sinking into my skin. My voice trembled. I couldn't finish the sentence. I couldn't make any sense of it. I looked at the door one more time, my mind screaming at me to leave, to do something. But my legs wouldn't move. I couldn't tear my eyes away from the creature, even though every instinct told me to run. It was almost close enough now. I could feel the cold radiating off of it. The temperature in the room had dropped, each breath I took now visible in the air. And then, in the blink of an eye, it was right in front of me. The shadow of its face loomed closer, and I could feel the air shift like it was sucking the very life out of me. For a split second, I thought I saw a flash something behind its mask. A glimpse of a face, my face but distorted, wrong. Then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness once more. I gasped, stumbling back, nearly falling as the weight of the room pressed against me. "You should have never returned," the thing whispered. The air itself seemed to vibrate with its words. "You belong to us now." I couldn't take it anymore. I couldn't stand there, frozen, while it slowly closed the gap. I turned and ran as fast as I could, my feet slipping on the floor, my pulse deafening in my ears. But as I ran, the sound of footsteps, its footsteps followed. No matter how fast I moved, it was right behind me. I didn't dare look back. Couldn't he look back? My feet pounded against the floor, each step echoing like a drumbeat in the suffocating silence that had swallowed the apartment. The walls seemed to stretch on forever, elongating as if mocking my desperation. No matter how fast I ran, the hallway only seemed to get longer. The door, my one chance at escape, felt farther away with each breath I took. The air had turned colder, sharper. My breath came in short, rugged gasps, the icy air burning my lungs as I sprinted. But still the steps behind me slow, measured, but constant followed. I knew it was there, just out of sight, but I could feel the weight of its presence bearing down on me. Why won't he leave me alone? The question echoed in my mind, but it wasn't just mine. It was a chorus of voices, all crying out for an escape that didn't exist. The walls pressed in, squeezing the life out of the air. I could hear whispers now, low and indistinct, coming from all directions. They clawed at my sanity, dragging me deeper into this nightmare. Suddenly, a flash of movement caught my eye just at the edge of the hallway. For a brief second, I saw it, the figure, more distinct now, its long limbs twitching, stretching unnaturally. It was moving faster, gaining on me. Its distorted face not a face, not any more twisted, as if it was learning to take form. And then it spoke. "You can escape." The words chilled me to the core, each syllable dripping with malice, as though it was savoring every ounce of my terror. The sound of its voice seemed to ripple through the air, warping it, distorting reality itself. I was trapped. Trapped in this endless maze of hallways, suffocated by the oppressive darkness that seemed to pulse around me. My legs felt like lead, each step harder than the last. Sweat soaked through my clothes, and I could feel my heart hammering in my chest. My mind raced. Was this real? Was I hallucinating? Had I truly come back to this place, or was I lost in my own mind, spinning in a nightmare that had no end? Another step. Another whisper. Closer now. I couldn't breathe. I needed to get out. I needed to wake up. "You can wake up," the voice hissed. It was almost as if it was inside my head, reading my thoughts, twisting them into something dark and terrible. The figure was almost there, just a few steps away, its hands long, skeletal reaching out, fingers stretching, closing in. A low growl rumbled in the back of my throat, a desperate instinct to fight. I wasn't going to let it have me, I couldn't. I refused. I bolted toward the door. My hand shot out to grab the handle once more, but this time it was different. The metal was ice cold, colder than before, and my fingers slipped off it. I gripped it harder, panic rising like bile in my throat. The whispers around me grew louder, more urgent, frantic. I could hear my name now, soft, almost sweet, calling me back. But it wasn't my name. It couldn't be. It was the thing behind me, the thing that knew me better than I knew myself. Come to me. It wasn't a command. It was an invitation. A sick, twisted invitation that held the promise of finality. And somehow I couldn't resist. My body trembled, my mind torn between the desire to flee and the compulsion to listen. I forced the door open, stumbling out into the hallway. But the hallway it wasn't the same. It couldn't be. The walls were closing in, the ceiling lowering, the lights flickering erratically, casting long, jagged shadows. The air was thick, suffocating, and the darkness clung to every corner like a living thing. The hallway stretched on, endless. My footsteps echoed loudly, growing louder with each step, a stark contrast to the silence that had surrounded me just moments ago. And then I saw it. The door. The front door. The one that led to the outside. It was just ahead, but as I approached, it felt as though the entire space between us was expanding. My mind screamed for me to run faster, to make it before it was too late. But my legs were frozen. I reached the door and yanked it open, only to be met with more darkness. No light. No world beyond it. Just more void. What is happening? I stepped back, the door slamming shut behind me with a deafening crash. And in the instant that it closed, the figure, that thing was there. Right in front of me. I could see it clearer now. Its face was no longer distorted. No longer a mask of grotesque features. Now it was me. Or rather, it was a version of me. Twisted, broken, with hollow eyes that glowed with an eerie light. Its mouth stretched into an unnatural grin, as though it had been waiting for this moment all along. It took a step toward me, and with it the apartment seemed to shrink even further until there was nothing left but the two of us trapped in this empty void. You were not getting out. I screamed, stumbling backward. The walls moved in, the apartment folding around me, closing me in. I was suffocating. My vision blurred. My mind split into 1,000 pieces. The figure reached out, my hand reaching for me. And just like that, everything went black. You made it to the end of the stories. That means it's the perfect time to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes. And if you haven't already, leave a like and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have a great time relaxing, and good night.